The human mind holds secrets that we reveal through our everyday words, and today you're about to discover how to decode them. Picture yourself at dinner with someone you've recently met. They're discussing their work, hobbies, and passions. Everything appears flawless, yet something feels off. A phrase, an expression, a particular way of speaking that sets off your internal alarm. You can't explain it, but you sense there's something lurking beneath the surface. According to Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, nothing in human language happens by accident. Every word we speak serves as a direct pathway to our unconscious mind. Our genuine intentions, suppressed desires, and deepest fears surface through what we say, even when we believe we're maintaining perfect control. Today we'll uncover 7 seemingly harmless phrases that, according to Freud, reveal far more than the speaker wants to acknowledge. These are signals you can recognize instantly, and that can transform your personal and professional relationships. If you want to keep exploring the mysteries of human behavior, subscribe to the channel. Our first signal begins with a phrase we hear daily. When someone tells you it's nothing personal, pause for a moment. According to Freud, this phrase represents one of the clearest examples of what he termed reaction formation, a defense mechanism that conceals exactly the opposite of what's being expressed. Imagine receiving criticism from your boss during a meeting. He concludes with, "It's nothing personal, just business." But observe his body language, tone of voice, and timing. Freud would argue that when someone feels compelled to specify that something isn't personal, it's precisely because it is. The unconscious operates like a pressure system. When we suppress intense emotions, anger, envy, frustration, they don't disappear. They transform and emerge through what Freud called the return of the repressed. The phrase, "it's nothing personal," represents the ego's attempt to maintain a rational facade, while the unconscious pushes to express something much deeper and more personal. Consider this. Why would someone feel the need to deny the personal aspect if there wasn't genuinely something personal involved? It's like saying, "Don't think of a pink elephant." The very act of denial draws attention to what one wants to hide. From a practical standpoint, when you hear this phrase, ask yourself, what's the real emotional relationship between me and this person? What might have triggered such a strong reaction that requires this denial? Freud maintained that in human relationships, everything is personal, because everything passes through the filter of our personal history, traumas, and projections. The person who frequently uses this expression often struggles to recognize and manage their own emotions. They might have learned from childhood that showing feelings is a sign of weakness, so they develop this mechanism to protect their ego from external and internal judgment. But there's an even deeper aspect. According to Freudian theory, when we deny the emotional aspect of a situation, we're unconsciously asking the other person not to react emotionally. It's a subtle form of control. Since I'm saying it's not personal, you don't have the right to feel hurt. Here's the paradox. The more someone insists something isn't personal, the more they reveal how personally involved they are. It's the rational ego's attempt to dominate the emotional id, but the id always finds a way to be heard. Have you ever noticed how this phrase is often used before or after, particularly cutting statements? It's nothing personal, but your work isn't up to standard. The unconscious knows exactly what it's doing. First, it softens the blow with denial, then strikes where it hurts most. Next time you hear this phrase, don't focus on the words. Observe the context, the relationship, the timing. Freud would tell you you're witnessing a battle between conscious and unconscious, and the unconscious is winning. Have you seen this pattern in yourself or others? But be careful, because the second signal is even more subtle and concerns how we talk about others. I never judge anyone. If someone tells you this, prepare to be judged like never before. This phrase is a perfect example of what Freud called projection, combined with reaction formation. Imagine being at a party where someone you've just met says, "You know, I'm not the type who judges. Live and let live." Then, in the next 10 minutes, they make subtle comments about other guests' clothing, behavior, and life choices. Freud would say you're witnessing the unconscious in action. Projection is one of the most powerful defense mechanisms of the human psyche. It works like this: when we have impulses, thoughts, or characteristics we can't accept in ourselves, we project them onto others. The person who insists they never judge is often the one with a particularly harsh superego, an internal critical voice that never stops. But there's an even deeper level. According to Freud, the need to declare one's non-judgmental nature stems from unconscious awareness of being extremely judgmental. It's as if the unconscious were saying, "I must say I don't judge, otherwise others will notice how much I judge." Observe carefully. People who make this statement often follow a precise pattern. First, the declaration of innocence, then a pause, then judgment masked as concern or neutral observation. "I never judge anyone, but I've noticed that Mary lately seems a bit, how should I put it, neglected." From a psychodynamic perspective, this phrase often reveals a history of being harshly judged. The child who grew up under the critical gaze of severe parents develops two survival strategies: becoming hypercritical, identification with the aggressor, or completely denying their judgmental nature, reaction formation. But pay attention to the social aspect of this mechanism. Declaring never to judge is a sophisticated way to position oneself morally. It's saying, "I'm better than those who judge." It's paradoxically the most subtle judgment that exists, judging those who judge. Freud observed that we often project onto others exactly what we can't see in ourselves. The person who says, "I never judge," might have developed selective blindness toward their own critical nature. It's as if they had a psychological blind spot right where their judgment mechanism is located. Here's a practical test. Next time someone makes this statement, observe how long it takes before they make an evaluative comment about someone else. Often it's seconds, not minutes. There's also an element of social control in all this. By declaring they don't judge, the person creates a safe space to then judge freely because they've already established their innocence. It's an unconsciously brilliant move by the ego to protect personal narcissism. The Freudian truth is that we all judge. It's a natural and necessary cognitive process. The problem arises when we deny this reality, because then our judgments become unconscious and therefore more harmful both to us and others. Do you recognize this mechanism in people around you? The third signal is even more disturbing and concerns how we talk about our past relationships. When someone tells you, "All my exes were crazy," you're not hearing an unfortunate coincidence. You're witnessing what Freud called repetition compulsion, the unconscious tendency to continuously recreate the same destructive relational dynamics. Imagine meeting someone who, during first dates, tells you how all their previous partners were unstable, too emotional, impossible to manage. According to Freud, this person is unconsciously revealing much more about themselves than about their exes. The psychological mechanism here is complex, but illuminating. Freud observed that we tend to choose partners who reactivate unresolved family dynamics. If someone always attracts crazy people, it's because they unconsciously seek those characteristics that allow them to repeat familiar relational patterns, even if painful. But there's an even deeper level. The definition of crazy often coincides with emotionally expressive. The person who labels all exes as crazy often has difficulty managing emotional intensity, both their own and others. It's a defense mechanism that allows them not to confront their own inability for authentic intimacy. Freud would say this phrase reveals a splitting of the ego. On one side, there's the self that desires love and connection. On the other, there's the self that fears intimacy and therefore unconsciously sabotages relationships. When the relationship inevitably fails, the ego protects narcissism by attributing blame to the crazy partner. Observe this pattern. Often these people are attracted to emotionally intense partners in the initial phase of the relationship, then reject them when that same intensity becomes too much. It's the classic cycle of idealization and devaluation that Freud identified in narcissistic disorders. From a practical standpoint, if someone tells you all their exes were problematic, ask yourself, what's the common element in all these relationships? The only constant element is the person in front of you. It doesn't mean they're bad, but that they probably have unresolved unconscious patterns that influence their relational choices. There's also a projection aspect in all this. Often the craziness attributed to exes is actually the projection of unintegrated parts of themselves. The rational and controlled person projects onto their partner their own repressed emotionality, then rejects it when it becomes too intense. Freud maintained that repeating is easier than remembering and processing. It's simpler to say, I'm unlucky in love, than to confront, why do I always choose the same type of people? What am I trying to recreate or resolve? An interesting detail. These people often tell the same stories with the same words, as if they'd become a protective script. The script protects them from having to look more deeply at their role in creating these dynamics. But be careful. When someone tells you this during first dates, they might unconsciously be warning you. It's as if they were saying, here's what happens to those who get too emotionally close to me. Have you ever noticed this pattern in people you know? The fourth signal is more subtle, but reveals something fundamental about personality. I always say what I think. This phrase should make you sound all alarm bells. According to Freud, it represents one of the most sophisticated ways that the id's aggression masks itself as an ego virtue. Imagine being at work with a colleague who boasts about being always honest. Then you see them make cutting comments about others' projects, harshly criticize ideas in meetings, and when someone gets offended, they respond, sorry, but that's how I am. I always say what I think. Freud would tell you you're observing primitive aggression hiding behind a facade of intellectual honesty. The psychological mechanism is brilliant in its simplicity. The id, the most primitive part of our psyche, has aggressive impulses that need outlet. But the superego, our moral conscience, cannot allow direct aggression. The solution? Transform aggression into honesty. Freud observed that this dynamic often has roots in childhood. The child who gets praised for telling the truth, even when it hurts, learns that aggression is acceptable if labeled as sincerity. It becomes a socially acceptable way to dominate and control others. But there's an even deeper aspect. The person who always says what they think often has a complicated relationship with social filtering. Freud would say their ego is weak at mediating between id and superego. They can't hold back impulses long enough to transform them into constructive communication. Observe this pattern. These people rarely always say what they think when the thought is positive or vulnerable. They don't say, I think you're wonderful, or I think I was wrong. Their honesty is curiously selective. It emerges primarily when it coincides with critical or aggressive impulses. From a relationship perspective, this phrase is often a disguised warning. It's like saying, prepare to be hurt, but you won't be able to complain because I warned you that I'm honest. It's a sophisticated form of preemptive emotional abuse. Freud identified in this behavior also an element of psychological sadism. The person takes pleasure in inflicting emotional pain, but needs moral justification to do it. Honesty becomes unconscious permission to be cruel. There's also an aspect of territorial control. By declaring they always say what they think, the person establishes that they have the right to express anything, while others must passively accept. It's an asymmetrical power dynamic masked as a personal characteristic. An interesting detail, these people often get deeply offended when someone else applies the same standard of brutal honesty to them. Their thin skin reveals that harshness toward others is often compensation for internal fragility. Freud would say that true honesty requires courage, vulnerability, and above all, the ability to look at oneself with the same clarity with which one looks at others. Selective sincerity is instead a defense mechanism that protects the ego from true intimacy and real confrontation with oneself. Have you ever met people who use honesty as a weapon? But the fifth signal reveals something even deeper about our control mechanisms. I don't care what others think. If someone feels the need to say it, it means they care more than they're willing to admit. This is one of the purest manifestations of what Freud called reaction formation, transforming an unacceptable impulse into its opposite. Imagine being with someone who proclaims their independence from others' judgment. Then observe carefully. They continuously check others' reactions, excessively justify their choices, react disproportionately to criticism. Freud would tell you you're witnessing the struggle between a deep need for approval and the shame of having it. The unconscious mechanism is complex. Often this phrase stems from early wounds related to rejection or judgment. The child who was criticized or ridiculed develops armor of false independence to protect their fragile ego. But the id preserves the original need to be accepted and loved. Freud observed that people most dependent on others' approval are often those who most vehemently deny this dependence. It's as if the unconscious were saying, if I deny my needs strongly enough, maybe it will disappear. But repressed needs never disappear. They transform and find indirect ways to manifest. Observe this paradox. Those who say they don't care about others' judgment often have a lifestyle, way of dressing, language studied to provoke reactions. It's an unconscious way to get attention, even negative, while maintaining the facade of independence. From a psychodynamic perspective, this statement often masks a hypertrophic superego, an internal critical voice so strong that the person had to develop a counter-voice that screams their independence. It's an internal battle between the part that wants to please and the part that's afraid of being vulnerable. There's also an element of control in all this. By declaring they don't care about others' opinions, the person tries to preemptively control others' reactions. It's like saying, don't even try to hurt me with your judgment because it doesn't affect me. But this very declaration reveals how much judgment actually scares them. Freud identified in this behavior also a mechanism for protecting narcissism. Rather than risk being rejected for who they really are, these people create a strong and independent character that theoretically can't be hurt. A particularly interesting aspect is the timing of this statement. It's often pronounced precisely in moments of greatest vulnerability, after criticism, during conflict, when they feel judged. It's the moment when the unconscious feels the threat most strongly and activates its most powerful defenses. But there's a high psychological cost. Denying the natural need for connection and approval leads to emotional isolation. The person protects themselves from rejection, but also deprives themselves of the joy of authentic acceptance. Freud maintained that true emotional maturity isn't indifference to others' judgment, but the ability to remain centered on one's authenticity while recognizing the importance of social relationships. Do you recognize moments in yourself when you've used this defense? The final signal is perhaps the most revealing of all and concerns how we talk about our responsibilities. I just wanted to help. This phrase, spoken after our help, has created problems or resistance, is one of the most subtle manifestations of what Freud would recognize as reaction formation, combined with control needs masked as altruism. Imagine knowing someone who continuously interferes in others' situations, offers unrequested advice, makes decisions for others for their own good. When people react negatively, they always respond with, "But I just wanted to help." Freud would tell you you're observing the id seeking power and control through a socially acceptable mask. The psychological mechanism is particularly insidious. The need for control and dominance are impulses that the superego cannot accept directly. They're considered bad or selfish. But if they're transformed into help, they become not only acceptable, but morally superior. It's one of the most refined unconscious strategies for obtaining power while maintaining a positive self-image. Freud observed that this pattern often has roots in dysfunctional family dynamics. The child who grows up in a chaotic environment can develop a false sense of responsibility for others' well-being. Helping becomes the way to feel necessary, important, and to maintain an illusion of control in uncontrollable situations. But there's an even deeper aspect. The person who just wants to help often projects onto others their own need to be saved. It's as if they unconsciously said, "I help you as I would like to be helped." It's a form of self-therapy through others. Observe this pattern. These people's help often creates dependency rather than autonomy. They don't teach fishing, they give fish. Why? Because unconsciously they need others to remain in a position of need to maintain their role as saviors. From a psychodynamic perspective, this phrase often reveals an ego with weak boundaries. The person has difficulty distinguishing where their needs end and others begin. Help becomes a way to symbolically merge with the other, avoiding fear of abandonment. There's also an element of subtle emotional manipulation. By declaring good intentions, the person makes it difficult to criticize their behavior. Those who oppose risk seeming ungrateful or bad. It's a sophisticated form of emotional blackmail. How can you criticize me if I just wanted to help you? Freud identified in this behavior also an avoidance mechanism. It's easier to focus on others' problems than confront one's own. Compulsive help becomes a way to escape self-analysis and inner work. A particularly revealing aspect is the reaction when help is refused. If the intention were truly altruistic, the person would accept no gracefully. Instead, they often react with offense, anger, or continue insisting. This reveals that help serves more to satisfy the savior's needs than the saved's. The Freudian truth is that authentic help stems from respect for others' autonomy and awareness of one's own limits and motivations. When helping becomes an identity rather than an action, it often masks unrecognized, unconscious needs. Have you ever recognized this dynamic in your relationships? Now that we've explored all 7 signals, it's time to integrate this knowledge. Freud taught us that the unconscious never lies. Every time we deny something too vehemently, every time we declare ourselves to be what we perhaps aren't, we're revealing exactly what we're trying to hide. The question I leave you with is this: which of these signals do you recognize most in yourself, and what does it reveal about your most authentic and hidden part? If this journey into the unconscious has struck you, leave a comment writing the city you're watching us from. Hit like if you want to continue exploring the secrets of the human psyche, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other content that can transform how you see relationships. Share this video with someone who could benefit from this awareness. Thank you from the heart for being part of this community of human soul explorers.